Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. This is Carly Wiltsey with IACAA, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Today, we will be talking about ethnographic interviewing, and this is the second webinar in the IACAA webinar series. So we want to thank you all for being on here this morning. We have a really great presenter for today, and so we will move to the next slide. Maybe. Here we go. So before we start, if you all would like to say the promise of community action with me, I will read it here. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. So this is today's presenter, Melissa Kramer from Kendall Grundy Community Action. She is the assistant director there, and she will be talking about ethnographic interviewing today. And before I move forward, I do want to say that this webinar will be recorded. And so you will have access to this webinar to watch it again after this morning. And then I also want to mention that everyone is muted. When you look at your dashboard, you should see yourself under the attendees list. And if you have any questions throughout this presentation, feel free to raise your hand. Or if you'd like to type into the chat box, I will be looking for any questions coming in or any comments while Melissa's presenting. And then she'll keep an eye out too. And then at the end of her presentation, we will also have some time for questions as well. And then just wanted to add that this webinar series is supported by funding from DCEO, the Office of Community Assistance. And so, like I said earlier, this is our second webinar in this IACAA webinar series. And so I will go ahead and hand the control over to you, Melissa.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, I think that you should have control now.
All right. See here. I don't think so.
No? Okay.
So how would I, there we go.
Is it working now?
Can you see? Let's go. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So then we're going to go here. So we already went through all that, okay. All right, so I'm here to talk to you about ethnographic interviewing, what it is, how we use it, and how you can use it too. It's a way of capturing that qualitative data for any needs assessment, and it's a way to cross that off one of your CSBG standards. I know that in the organizational standards, one of the things that they're requiring is quantitative and qualitative data. And so this is a way for you to capture some qualitative data in your needs assessment. So I'm going to go over some of the ways and how we do it at our agency. And an explanation is one of the things that kind of maybe make us different than other agencies is that we're in a health department. And so every health department has to have an I-plan to be accredited. And an I-plan is part of a community health assessment. And so we use the community health assessment to also create our community action plan and our needs assessment for community action. But that doesn't mean that you can't use the same methods that we do as well. And but you may want to look at other health departments that are in your area to maybe partner with, because they probably do something very similar in their community health assessment and their I-plan. So what I'm going to do first here is, this is the PowerPoint that Dr. Tokar, as the executive director, used to teach staff how to do ethnographic interviews before we actually went out in the field and did the interviews. So one of the first things that you probably want to do is to actually train your staff on what they are and how to do them, and how to gather the data that's collected from all the surveys. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through her PowerPoint and kind of talk you through it. And then I will show you what we did after we were trained. All right, so here we go. So first she goes and explains what a community health assessment is. So you might want to explain to your staff basically what a community needs assessment is. And it's pretty much the same thing, just looking at different factors. So a genuine community involvement with community health assessment can ensure appropriate community ownership. So the reason why you're trying to get the community involved with your needs assessment is that it kind of gives them ownership on it, like it's theirs. The community needs assessment is what they're telling you are the needs, where you create your work programs from. Results of the community assessment will drive the identification of strategic issues and intervention activities for years to come. It is important to take great care in implementing an assessment process that ensures broad participation. You want very diverse participants in your interviews. You want to make sure that. Data and indicator analysis provide descriptive information on demographic and socioeconomic characteristics. They can be used to monitor progress and determine whether actions have the desired effect. They also characterize important parts of health status, health determinants, such as health behavior, community environment, or healthcare access. And this, you know, like I said, it's from a health department, but this could also be parts of your general needs assessment. So a community health assessment indicators should be methodologically sound, valid, reliable, and collected over time, feasible, it's available and collectible, meaningful, relevant, and potentially linked to evidence-based interventions, and important, linked to significant well-being or disparity burden. So we use something called MAP. There's all these acronyms. It's called Mobilizing Action Through Planning and Partnerships Assessment Lenses. Oh gosh, what is that? So there's a bunch of parts that we take in order to complete our community needs assessment or health assessment. And there's the local public health system assessment, community themes and strengths assessment. That's where these ethnographic interviews come in, right here. You're looking for community themes and strengths. Then we do a community health status assessment and force of change assessment. All right, so we're focusing on the community themes and strengths assessments today. This is going to provide a deep understanding of the issues residents experience as important. You're going to get that from your interviews. You're going to gather community thoughts, concerns, and experiences. and the community provides insight into issues of importance. That's the whole purpose of doing ethnographic interviews. You want to get the story behind the data that you're collecting. You want to encourage storytelling, and you're going to find, at least I have, and I know that when I'm writing the community action plan and the needs assessment, after I gather all the data, there's a lot of aha moments, like, aha, that's why this is happening. And I'll show you examples as we go through, like, I know like staff, when I'm writing this, I'm running up and down the hall and I'm like, oh my God, I think I figured out why this is happening. This is what we should do. This might be how we can solve this problem. And I mean, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but you know, trial and error. But I do end up enjoying writing the community action plan because I end up finding things that I never would have thought of before. And it's because your community members, they're the experts. It's not always me or the people that are working in the agency. This is your chance of actually getting out there and finding things that maybe you're not seeing. Okay, community themes and strengths assessment steps. So first, you prepare for the community themes and strengths assessment. You implement the information gathering activities. You compile the results and you summarize key findings and ensure that community involvement and empowerment is sustained. Now, what's an IRB? This is a best practice recommendation. We have our IRB, our internal review board, is our governing board, and you can use your advisory board. But when you are going to go out in the field and do surveys or do any kind of research where you're using subjects, which are the people that you're interviewing, you always want to make sure you best practice that your board reviews what you're doing. It ensures, it says IRB protocols are used to be certain of ethical behavior when working with human research subjects. An IRB is a committee within an organization charged with compliance to standards of research involving human subjects. The committee reviews research documents developed and submitted by the researcher. IRB protocol. So research purpose, they go over the purpose, the questions, your methodological design, the subject selection, who you're interviewing, the method of recruitment, how you're finding your subjects, the recruitment material, gender and race. You want to make sure, like I said, that you have a good representation in your interviews of your community. Subject withdrawal. Sometimes people will not want to participate, or there's been a couple of times where I'm out interviewing someone and I'll ask a question and they don't want to answer anymore, or they just don't want to participate. The risks and benefits. Subject confidentiality, that's an important one. You want to ensure that your subjects, that people that you're interviewing, is confidential. You're not revealing any personal information in your data. Data analysis, how you're going to use the data. Informed consent. And then the interview questions. So this is just, like I said, a best practice thing. So when you're going to be interviewing people out in the field, you want to make sure that you have maybe a committee or your board, your advisory board, go over what you're doing to make sure that what you're doing isn't potentially harmful. Okay, anthropological research. This is where when she started talking about this, I started to get, had to go and look up some of the stuff that she was talking about. So she explains that anthropological research is the problem with studying peoples not as a center of mainstream culture, is that social schema is informed by a juxtaposition with the social world and the subsequent experience with social structures. So what does that mean? So what schema is, those are scripts or expectations, kind of like how people think about themselves and their social world, because some people may see the world differently than you or somebody else. And if someone's not at the center of mainstream culture, they may have a completely different experience than somebody who is. So people who are not as connected or isolated, you want to make sure that you, like I said, have a diverse group of people that you're interviewing. Anthropological research deals with the creation and transmission of meaning. And then in this slide, she went over the many different kinds and types of research that happens with anthropology. So you guys are getting kind of like Anthropology 101 here, the crash course. So she talked about the dominant definition versus, this is such a hard word for me to say. All right, I'm gonna try it. Phenomenological meaning. So what does that mean? So the dominant definition of something is that what is powerful or influential versus phenomenological meaning, which is an actual lived experience. You're going deep, you're digging in, and you're finding out the people in your community's lived experiences, what their meaning is as they're living in the community. The objective observer versus the participant observer. So the objective observer is just giving facts, details, no interpretation, where the participant observer is actually becoming a part of the group. Some examples that a lot of anthropologists and sociologists do is they actually, when they're doing research, they'll actually become part of the community. There's a couple books that I've read in my time where gang leader for a day, there was a man who actually lived in the Cabrini Green area and became a gang leader for a day, but he actually like lived with them and participated with them and wrote a book about it so that he dug deep in, and it's actually a really, really good book. And some people wrote books when they lived with people that were homeless or experiencing homelessness in tent encampments and actually like lived and tried to became and participated in their environment so that you can get a very deep look at to what their life experiences or their phenomenological meaning. All right, mainstream constructs versus contextual constructs. So mainstream constructs is what's popular, almost like you assume that you know, like everyone assumes it's mainstream. But contextual, that's what you're kind of grasping with these interviews. You're observing, you're inquiring, you're documenting, you're going to find nuances to things. Hypothetical affirmation versus grounded theory. So hypothetical affirmation is something that's already known or imagined. Grounded theory is you know this because the data showed it to you. That's how you know it. You looked at what happened, you observed, you inquired, you documented, like here, and the data showed you this. Generalization versus triangulation. So generalization is broad statements. It may not be true, you're generalizing. Triangulation is cross-verifying through many sources. So that quantitative, qualitative data, it's triangulating through primary and secondary sources. So you're weaving it through. So you have, you know, data from all these articles and maybe from your surveys that you give out where people are actually choosing, they're not open-ended questions. And then you also look at your qualitative data, which are coming from your interviews, your ethnographic interviews, and you're seeing that they're actually, the themes and the strengths and the needs are actually coinciding with each other, and that's called triangulation. So you're like cross-verifying through many different sources. You're not just cherry picking, you're cross-verifying. Okay, so the ethnographic method, primary data is central rather than secondary data. So primary data is coming from your community, your agency, where secondary data is coming from articles, textbooks, things of that nature. So when you're doing the ethnographic interviews, you're gathering primary data because you're interviewing the people that are in the community. Fieldwork includes forms of inquiry that requires a researcher to be immersed in the social setting. So you're going out into the community, and I'll show you all the places that we went to interview everybody. You're going to go to lots of different places because you're going to be immersed in the social, you're going to them, and you're going to be talking to them in their setting, in their social setting, or the setting that you wish to analyze. Sociocultural dynamic does inform research. Sociocultural dynamic is the behavior of groups and individuals that come through from interactions. So when she started talking about ontology and epistemology, I was like, oh man, this takes me back to when I was in grad school and I had to write all these papers on ontology and epistemology. And I'm like, what is that? What is, I had such a hard time figuring out. It's very philosophical. Basically, ontology, as she says, the study of the essentialities of being and reality, i.e. who is expert. So it's like, what is true? It's a study of what's real. Who is the expert? The expert are the people in your community. I'm not saying you're not the expert, but you are looking at the people in the community as being the expert. And that's why you're interviewing them, because that's where you're going to get what's real. And epistemology, the theoretical analysis of knowledge and knowing, i.e. inductive inquiry. That's how we form knowledge, through observations, what we learn from others without assumptions. That's inductive research. Whereas deductive research is you start with an assumption and you kind of look for data to prove that. Whereas with ethnographic interviewings, you have no assumptions. You go out and interview and then you form themes that way. So that's what inductive is. You don't have a theory. The theory comes from the data. Whereas deductive is you have a theory and you're going to find data to prove that theory. That's the difference between inductive and deductive inquiry. Okay, so let's see here. Ethnographic attributes. Constructivist production, sociocultural context, continuing inquiry. That's an important one. So when you're asking them questions, these are going to be very open-ended questions. You're trying to start a conversation. You want to encourage storytelling. So when you're asking a question, be prepared for follow-up questions based on how they answer. Emic rather than etic validity. That's something I had no idea what it was, and I had to look it up. So emic is the researcher gains from the insider's point of view. And that's basically what you're doing. You're gaining knowledge based on the people in the community's point of view. Etic validity is looking from a distance. You're not really there, but you're just sort of looking from a distance. So we're looking for emic validity. Interview transcriptions. That is when you're interviewing somebody and you gotta write it all down. And you're like, how do I do that? Some sociologists, what they do is they have the conversation, they run back into their car and they're typing everything up. They try to have it all from memory. What I do is I bring like a little notebook, like a computer, and I type what they say so that at least I have the gist of everything and I can pull it all together later when I'm away from the interview. And you can also record them if they'll let you, but you want to encourage conversation. You don't want to be like in their face. So data coding, and you're going to start finding themes. The more people that you interview, you're going to start hearing that they're saying some of the same things over and over again. And those are your themes. And those themes are what's going to kind of lead you into your community action plan and how you're going to create your work programs. And then there's that data triangulation again, the qualitative, quantitative, the data, the numerical data versus the more open-ended question data. Thick description, what that means is basically you're digging deep and describing and doing the story behind the numbers. You know, when you're reading something and it's all numbers, it's, I don't know, not very entertaining. I mean, I guess it can be like, oh, this, but you really want the story behind it. And people love a good story. And when I write the community action plan and the needs assessment, what I get from the ethnographic interviews is what fills in and makes and describes the numbers and the story behind them so well. Okay. Reflexive iteration. What does that mean? That's those aha moments that I was talking to you about, where you're seeing the themes, you're seeing the data, it's all starting to make sense. And you're like, I got it. I know what we can do. It's refined understandings. So these are the type of interviews you can do. There's lots of different kinds. There's no right or wrong. There's the informal interview, which is a research question with no format or structure. You just are talking to people. There's the unstructured interview, which has the overarching research question and sub-questions with no format. So it's kind of like a script, but really with no format. Semi-structured, overarching research question and sub-questions with an interview guide. A structured interview, people are asked to respond to nearly an identical set of questions as possible. Or interviews are documented, recorded, or transcribed depending upon the cultural context. So that's what I was talking to you about, is when you're doing the interview, how are you documenting, recording, transcribing everything that they're saying? It depends on where you're at. So these were the questions that we asked during our ethnographic interviews. You don't have to use these questions. This is just an example. And remember, we are part of a health department, so there's questions that are based off of environmental, physical health as well. But you might want to ask questions too about what does housing, like, what does housing mean to you, or what are sort of needs or strengths? Or you can talk about quality education. What does quality education mean to you? And what are some needs and strengths in the community regarding that? Or transportation. What are some needs and strengths of the transportation here in this community? Because you know that the needs assessment is kind of separated into, I think it's like transportation, and then it's education, and it's housing, and it's employment and health. And so you may want to have some open-ended questions on each of those sections, but these were the ones that we used. All right, so then data analysis through coding. So there's open coding and there's IACAA coding. Open coding is examining the phenomenon through thick description. You're segmenting the data theme into meaningful expressions. You're characterizing an emergent theme arising from the text of your interviews. You're using a constant comparative to triangulate the themes. There's validity, there's saturation and triangulation. And then there's axial coding, which is the process of relating the emerging constructs via both that inductive and deductive thinking that we were talking about. So you're looking at the phenomenon under study and what are the conditions related to it, strategies for addressing what you're finding, and the outcome. So that's kind of like that axial coding. There's Roma right there. So there's, you're seeing the conditions, you're looking for strategies, what you're going to do to address what's going on, and then what are the outcomes from the actions taken to address the phenomenon. All right, collective analysis through triangulation. So this is where we talk about where I was talking about before. So your triangulation between the data that you get from your interviews and then your primary data and your secondary data is crucial. So you're using those three things. You have your ethnographic interviews, you got your primary data, so that's all the data that you got from the community where like through your agency, and then the secondary data, which is, for example, stuff that you get from newspapers, articles, or even community commons. If you're using that, that's secondary data. While each of the assessments alone will yield important information for improving community health, only the collective analysis of all assessments will yield to complete health and well-being picture of the community. All right, so where do you go? These are all the places that you can go to do your interviews. These are very common options. I know we definitely went to beauty salons, we went to churches, we went to gyms, we did go to the jail, grocery stores, we did go to the laundromat, we did go to Rural King and Walmart. So those are the different places. And the other thing that you need to think about is confidentiality and consent. You need to let the subjects know that you will take detailed notes in order for the input to be clear. You need to explain the use of demographic documentation, but no identifiable information. And I'll show you an example of that. Explain the purpose of the interview. You want to let them know why you're doing this so that they have a better understanding of what their input means and why their input is so important. A lot of times what I say is, we're doing interviews right now because we want to know from you what you're seeing so that we can better help you and your community. And they're like, oh, well, I can tell you some things, and then they'll tell you. Explain that the interview will take approximately half an hour. Sometimes it depends on the person. Half hour, that is max. You don't want to go more than a half an hour. A lot of times it could take maybe just 15 minutes, 10 minutes. It depends on how much they want to talk to you. Ask for explicit consent to conduct the interview. And then the use of data. Data will be used in aggregate only. and then participants are invited to the next community assessment meeting. So if you're going to have like any focus groups or any meetings with the community, or if you are going to present your needs assessment to the community, make sure that you maybe give them a flyer or information so that they can see like what they gave you and the results, because that can be very exciting, and that gives them the ownership of your community action plan. The aggregate data will be used to inform the community health plan priorities. That's just with the I-plan, but it also helps with the community action plan. It helps you figure out what your needs are, your goals, and what work programs are needed in the community. And here are some references for further study. If you want to read more about ethnographic interviewing. And here's a quote: "Looking ahead, I believe that the underlying importance of higher education, of science, of technology, of research and scholarship to our quality of life, to the strength of our economy, to our security in many dimensions will continue to be the most important message." It's by Charles Vest. Okay, and now I want to show you, before we go to questions, are there any questions, Carly, that we see coming through?
I haven't seen any come through. I did have one person ask for a copy of this presentation, like of the slides, and I did tell her that
Okay.
we will share that with her, but no other questions have came in at this point.
Okay, so I wanted to show this. This is our ethnographic interview tracker. So what you see here is everybody that we had, staff, and we also partnered with local universities as well to go out and conduct the interviews. So everybody was assigned a certain amount, and they would pick the places that they would go, the type of location, name, and this was just so that we also could keep track of where everyone's going so we don't keep going to the same places. Now, unfortunately, due to COVID, we were not able to complete as many of the interviews as we could, because we started this in February, and then we quickly went into lockdown mid-March. So we did not finish, but we did get enough. Excuse me. You can see we went to laundromats, thrift stores, the local homeless shelter. We went to the gym, coffee shop, we went to Starbucks. We Care, that is another agency that also helps people who are in crisis. That's one of our partners, and you can also, interview your partners as well. We went to the community centers, the libraries, restaurants. So this was how we kept track of where we were going. And let's see here. So I did 7 surveys and myself, and when I was done with the surveys, then I took them all and I started to analyze them. And this is some of the things that I came up with. So I was looking at what was popping up the most, and what I pretty much wrote down what everybody said, very distinctly, and then highlighted what was said more than once to kind of take out some of the themes. So socioeconomic well-being, people said what that meant to them was the ability to pay their bills. It kept going over and over again. I mean, you're going to see themes as the more that you do. One of the needs in the community that people kept saying is there are jobs, but they're not high-paying jobs. We need more living wage jobs. That kept coming up over and over and over again. So this was what I did. And then here's some of the demographics of who I interviewed. So I did 4 males and 3 females, 4 Hispanic, 2 were Asian, 1 was white, and I had the younger group. Now the other staff members, they analyzed different age groups and different demographics as well, but this was the group that I ended up having to do to try to analyze the themes and the strengths that were coming out. And then we had a community themes and strengths assessment on May 5th. This is where the people that we interviewed, we invited them to come. Well, we had to do it via Zoom, and this became our focus group. And we talked about, and Dr. Tokars presented what came out of all the interviews, and we came up with very salient community themes and strengths. And this is where, once you come out with the themes and strengths, you're going to find that it becomes very useful to describe some of the things that you are explaining in your needs assessment. So here is our community action plan. And I wanted to give you guys an example. So here was one of the questions. Why do you believe people have problems getting or keeping a full-time living wage job? Select all that apply. And this was from the survey that was given by DCO. So we used that survey, and these were the options that they had, and these were the answers that came out. And because what ended up happening with these questions was, when our clients, every single one of them. And the question, and this is what I've learned, next time that I'm going to do these surveys, I'm going to ask, please pick the 3 top, not select all that apply, because what ends up happening is they end up picking all of them. Yes, 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 yes. So then you're having not a lot of outliers here. I mean, if they're picking everything, then it kind of doesn't really spread out and nothing really comes out at you. So like the top 4 responses is 14%, 12%, 10%, 8%. But because I did ethnographic interviews, I had an example to go, or a story behind the numbers right here. One community member wrote, I think the wages of jobs are starting to increase slowly in some places. So workforce is changing, but every job needs experience of some years, or a certificate, or a degree, or really, where are the entry-level jobs where they trained you on the job? Instead, these jobs want you all trained up at some fancy for-profit school before you even start, and that costs money. No one can just walk in and apply for a job anymore. What this community member wrote was a huge theme that came out of my interviews. A lot of people of all walks of life were saying the same thing, very similar to what this member was saying. So this is the story behind the numbers. And that is one of the, some other ones, if you want me to keep going. I know I wrote a lot. My community action plan is really long, but some people, they will talk to you, and they will give you so much insight for you to really have a better understanding of your community, and that you can actually create work programs through these ethnographic interviews, which is your primary data and then your secondary data too. So that is, I went for about 45 minutes. All right, so that is, any questions? Anyone has?
Hey, Melissa, there was a question from Jane Hopkins. She had asked, how many of these interviews do you conduct for your iPlan?
Okay, so if we go back to the now, so these are how many, if I don't have a count, but these were how many that we wanted to do, but then COVID happened. So like I said, we didn't do all that we wanted to do. But to be statistically significant, I always say rule of thumb is 25. I always try to get at least 25 interviews. And you don't have to have 10 or 15 questions. You can just have 3 questions. You can have 4 or 5 questions. But I think to get a good diverse look at everything, that 25 is a really good number. And that's when you're really going to start to see the themes come up with your community, is around 25. You can still get some good information from doing 10 or 15, but you want to have a diverse group of people that you're interviewing in different places.
And then one more question from Jane. Is your community assessment available online?
Yes. So here is our website. So it's www.kendallhealth.org. So here is our website, and all of our assessments are under quick links. So we have our strategic plan, we have our community action plan, and then we have our I-plan. And we are right now creating the new I-plan coming up, but you can just, click on any of these and then it'll take you right to the community action plan that is the most recent. And then I know we had to just write the COVID CARES, CARES needs assessment too. And we're going to be putting that up on our website, and it should be under quick links soon after it's been approved.
Okay, great. She says thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So
I think there might just be one more slide after.
Is it?
Yes.
There it is.
Yeah. So we went to thank Melissa for this presentation today. Like I said before, we will. This webinar was recorded, and we will send out the PowerPoint slides to all of the attendees as well. So once the recording downloads, I will send an email out to everyone with a link to the recording and then a copy of the PowerPoint slides. And then this slide here just lists some of our upcoming webinars. So on October 6th, we have Preventing Sexual Harassment in the Workplace. And then our next one will be on October 21st, which is Cultural Competency. And then in November, we have on the 17th, another round of the Preventing Sexual Harassment in the Workplace. And then on the 18th, we have CEDA's Engage Harvey project, which will be a really good one to listen in on. So those are our upcoming webinars. And then Melissa, if you just want to go to that last slide, I think it's just an ending. Yeah. So we just want to thank you all for attending today's presentation. And we hope that you all stay safe. And thanks again to Melissa for taking time out of your day to share everything with us.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
All right. Well, everyone have a great day, and we will talk to you all soon.
Bye.
Thank you.